Welcome everybody to the show. We've got Melissa Daimler on here with us. And Melissa, I'm really glad to have you here. You have a wide range of experience, big company, small company, one-on-one stuff. I'm really looking forward to your insights. Would you please let the audience know a little bit about your background and what you're doing today?
Sure, thanks. It's great to be here. So yeah, I've been lucky enough to be in tech for over 20 years. I think it's over 25 now. As you said, I've had the great experience of being able to be part of a smaller startup in the beginning of my career, worked at kind of a mid-sized company with Adobe, then got an opportunity to be part of Twitter in what I would call the glory days. 2012 to 2016, and then most recently was at WeWork. And so, I would say my focus in my career has been around organizational development. So, working with leaders, teams, organizations, and in looking at how they can be effective. So as a leader, there's things that you can do to be more effective. And also there's things in your, what I'll call your system, that can help you or block you from being effective. And so whether it's an individual or an organization, I'm always kind of looking at that bigger kind of system and where are all the levers that we can pull to either propel you forward or that may be blocking you.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm curious, with your expertise in culture, I know we went through like a month, particularly the first month of this pandemic, where culture was kind of out the window. It's like, what do we need to do to survive, to move people remote, whatever it is. And now I'm finding my clients are now coming up for air and they have a little bit more time. What are your thoughts on what's happening with culture at companies as we went into the pandemic and now are hopefully coming out of it?
Yeah, hopefully. I would say the clients that I'm working with right now, obviously safety of the employees was crucial, figuring out just from a business, how long do we have to survive? What are all the different scenarios that we have to think through? Can we do everything we possibly can to not do a layoff? Are there furloughs? Are there pay reductions? Looking at every possible way that we can sustain our business without impacting the employees. So there's all of those pieces of the business that need to be looked after. And in fact, I worked with a lot of my clients on how you do that and what was the best way to do that. I did think that, culture and some of the conversations that I was having was going to be put aside. And I was sensitive to not being tone deaf in the middle of this pandemic. But as you said, a lot of the leaders realized that on their own, that actually culture is the one thing we can control. It's the thing that I need to be conscious of. And so there's the business scenario planning and everything we need to do as a business. That's, what I would call all of the what we do. And then there's how we're doing it. So even some of my clients who unfortunately had to do a layoff, how do you, working with them and thinking about how do you do a layoff that still has dignity and respect and compassion for the employee? Because as hard as it is for the company and the leaders, it's harder for the people being impacted. And so everything from how it gets communicated, and I'm sure you heard of the stories that weren't done so well with some of the companies here and how they laid people off.
Well, actually, take a moment and share some of the stories that were bad.
Yeah.
Our audience loves stories. So share some stories that were bad as an example of, hey, don't do this. And then I'm sure you've got some from your clients where they did a great job.
Yeah, well, so there were a few companies here that we're all on Zoom now. So unfortunately, we can't share. You always want to share tough messages in person. Next best thing is video. In these couple of companies, they ended up telling, I think it was almost 1,000 employees to get on a call. It was supposed to be an all hands. And they all got to the call. And within the first 2 minutes, somebody came on the line and said, "You're all being let go." And so again, it wasn't that they had to come on the video call. It was just that it was so abrupt. The way in which it was done was not ideal. And then there was no direction on what to do after. I think some of them had gotten an email an hour or two later on, how to pick up your things or how to turn in your things. And then it was all over, social media. I mean, we don't have to wait for any kind of article to come out. You can just go online to LinkedIn or Twitter and see what some of the employees just experienced. So, and I think sometimes we think that virtual is this new tool that we have. And in fact, I mean, we've had global companies for a long time. Even when I was at Adobe, we had some unfortunate times where we had to do some layoffs with people all over the world. And we had to do it via video or Zoom. But the way in which we did it was, and this gets to doing it right, we did kind of let employees know that we will be having a layoff. There are going to be some layoffs, and hopefully in that same day, they then have a one-on-one with their manager, who then has that conversation with them and can be a little more personable in terms of not just that you're being laid off, but here's what that means. Here's what your benefits are going to be. Here's how we're going to take care of you. And so there's this, connection, if you will, with that employee one-on-one that you just don't get when you just do a mass kind of communication via Zoom. So I think that's the big difference.
I like what you say too, is that in that situation, there was kind of the awareness that there's going to be a layoff. And then the same day, the manager meets with the employee. So you don't say there's going to be a layoff and then wait 2 weeks.
Oh my God, no. That would not be good. Yeah. And then, one of the other things that had happened, and again, this was all out on social media, was that their email was cut off. So they weren't able to get important documents or things that were important to them that were in the cloud. And so just the whole kind of, it was a domino effect, bad communication up front, and then every other touch point that you had an opportunity to say, we still care about you, they lost. So I think the companies that I was coaching and working with, they had seen that and said, that's not what we want to do. And in fact, both of these companies, I had done some work with them around values and behaviors. And they looked at their own values and said, one of our values in one company is communicate openly. So what does that look like? How do we bring people along, even though this is a bad message? How would we want to be communicated to? And so it wasn't just, kind of that day. It was even afterwards. I think a lot of the companies that are doing this well aren't just thinking about employees who are being impacted, but the employees who remain. I think there's a lot of survivor guilt going on right now, especially now, because this is such a tough economy. Likely, it's going to take a while for people to get jobs again. And so the people that remain are thinking, why me? And I think it's really important to be clear with them on why you. This is why you're staying, and this is how you're contributing. We're pivoting in our business, and this is how you're going to help us make an impact in this next phase of our growth. So I think that what you do after is important too.
And also, aren't those employees wondering, are they next? And
that's a really good question.
Going back to your transparency question, then leaders also have to decide, do we need to continue to be transparent with our finances and how we're doing, or be more transparent or whatever, because there's that whole engagement of the employees. Because they're going to be less productive if they're wondering whether they're next to get the
Right.
apps.
I think such a good point. And the hard part about that is you don't know. And
Yeah.
so that's what I've been talking with a lot of CEOs about right now. They're like, I don't want to say anything because I don't have the answer. And that's okay. I mean, even
Yeah.
you saying that is so good. And,
Yes.
just, this is what I know today. But I think the rolling layoffs, to your point, is the worst. I know, Uber probably had a good reason, but to lay off 25,000 and then a week and a half later, an additional 3,000, that's rough, because as an employee, I'm thinking in 2 more weeks, am I part of the next trough?
That's right.
So I think you can only share what you know, but some of the companies also are going deeper than they probably need to because of that very reason. They don't want to do the rolling layoffs. They want to go a little deeper than they probably should and make sure that there's just now a go forward plan with the employees they have.
And I remember you talked about early on that in culture, there's things leaders can do that increase engagement, and you didn't use all these terms, but you implied them, productivity, and how
Mm-hmm.
people take ownership of things. And then there's also things you can do that work against you. And
Mm-hmm.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about that now. What maybe are the biggest things to watch out for that leaders may be doing, but they're not even realizing they're doing, that are hurting themselves?
Mm-hmm.
And what are those types of things? Why don't we start with the negative and then get to the positive?
I think one of them is what we just talked about. Is one of the CEOs I coach. It was funny because we were talking about how this was about a month and a half ago. We were getting so overwhelmed about all of the articles out there, like how to work virtually, how to connect with your employees over Zoom, and everything in between about COVID-19. And he's like, God, I'm just going to stop for a little bit. I'm just going to not connect with employees as much because I think they're too overwhelmed. And I said, you're the one person that I think they would love to hear more from. And he's like, I have nothing to say. I have nothing more to say. We're still doing some business planning. I don't have the answers. I'm worried they're going to ask me something that I don't have an answer to. So we had that whole conversation around, that's okay if you just say you don't have the answer, but it's important to connect and engage with employees formally and informally. So in his case, he started diving into some Slack channels and just, popping in and saying hi, and, asking if anybody had questions, and even, stupid stuff, sharing the latest movies he's watching on Netflix, just having some kind of connection. So I would say one of the first things is to not disengage. You want to keep that connection going, formally and informally, with your employees.
I definitely agree with that. I have a great client, Peter Fiddler in New York, WCA Technologies, and he was very prudent on the steps that he took. And then he started regularly joining team meetings that he was not part of before.
Oh, great.
Just to say, I'm here if you have any questions for me. And then he really didn't have to say anything else. And then he also took it upon himself to kind of do a rotating cycle every couple of weeks, I think, or so. They only have about 20 employees, to check in one-on-one with each employee. And all he would say is, I don't really have any updates, but I just care about you as a member of the team and just want to check in, see how you're doing.
Love that. That is a great example.
Yeah.
I had written about this in one of my blogs. I was comparing it to a time that I was waiting for a flight from New York back to San Francisco, and there was an issue with the plane. And the guy that was behind the desk wasn't saying anything. He wasn't telling us anything. And in the absence of information, as you know, you make up the worst scenario ever. The worst scenario. And a woman, they were changing shifts, and a woman came in and she dropped her bag, got on the microphone and said, I have no idea what's going on here, but I will get you answers in about 5 minutes. And every kind of 10 minutes, she would say, hey guys, it's me again. I found out, in this case, it was a flat tire of all things, and they're getting a new tire. I'm going to come back with another update. Came back with another update. No new update, but I have some bottled water for you. And then another 10 minutes. So it was just this ongoing, we so appreciated that kind of ongoing communication, even if it was no new update. So I think this is what we're saying. And this is what I think the good leaders are doing. I think another example is this whole kind of balance between what I'll call kind of empathy and execution. I think the tendency right now is, as we said before, is to do. How are we executing? How are we moving forward? Versus, kind of making sure there's time for and space for the questions or for new ideas. And trying to understand where people are coming from in different functions and in different roles. And so being able to pause, slow down as much as it's hard right now, and not be so focused on doing all of the time, I think is another good best practice. I read a statistic the other day that I think 75% of people now are just fried, burnt out, zoomed out. And all of that time that we're saving from, commuting, we're now putting back into email or Zoom calls or even informal lunches. So we're connected all day long. And I think leaders are struggling right now in, how do I prevent burnout? How do I not have my employees feel like they have to be online all the time? And I think one of the other things that I'm seeing is just having, again, more clarity around what everybody is supposed to be doing. So instead of people feeling like they have to have FaceTime, like we used to think in the office, and now everybody feeling like unless they're connected on Zoom, there's going to be an assumption that I'm not working. Let's just get more clear on what your goals are and what I'm expecting from you, so that you don't think you have to be online all the time. And we can take advantage of this asynchronous time that's available to us when we're working from our homes.
Yeah, I think it is challenging. To be candid with you, yesterday afternoon, I had worked, about 7.5 hours, not including my breaks. I track my time. And I just hit a wall. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to get in the car and drive to Tahoe. It's like an hour and a half, 2 hours up the road. I was just like, I just need to get out of Dodge. I need to do something different. And I just stopped and I just did something else. But it's a very different environment. And are you seeing that some people are struggling as they have to transition from, walking out of their office and interacting with people to having to move to this online mode? Are some people more retreating? It just kind of a natural behavioral thing, or struggling with this issue of how often to reach out and how to reach out? Is it Zoom? Is it FaceTime? Is it just a phone call? Is it text, email, whatever?
Yes. I'm with you. I'm feeling the same way, and so I'm reaching out. I have a whole support system of colleagues and friends, and pretty consistently around 2 or 3, I'm fried. And I think also it's because we're taking in all of the stuff that our clients are giving us. We're trying to be the safety zone. And I'm finding myself getting really fried. In fact, yesterday I was supposed to have a Zoom call at 3:00. I'm like, can we just have a phone call? Like, I just need to walk outside while we're talking, because I'm zoomed out. And so I think more and more people are starting to kind of do that as well. But I think what we're doing wrong is and Jason Fried, who's CEO of Basecamp, is
he's great,
huge inspiration to me. And, they've been doing kind of the virtual thing forever. And he made such a good point. He said, we're trying to take everything that we did in the office and plop it into our days working at home now. And so, if we had all of these meetings live, we're now doing, one of my clients yesterday, she said, I'm trying to get down from 10 meetings a day to 7. That's just absurd. And so, and because you don't have that interstitial time, you know, the walking in between meetings and you know, some of the other kind of ways that you got energized when you were live in the office, we are getting more burnt out. And so I think we need to think differently about how we're designing our days. And, you know, one being getting clear on what it is we're supposed to be focused on. 2, do we need to have all these meetings? Do they all need to be an hour? Could some of them be 30 minutes? Is there another way that we can get this kind of information? It's a lot of things that you and I probably coach our clients on, or that we know is good business anyway. It's just that some of that stuff is being amplified now, and it's a must in terms of having people be feeling productive in their day-to-day work.
Yeah, I like your term "zoomed out." That's good. Or maybe we're zombies. I got my 14-year-old loves zombies.
Yeah.
So we could be zombies. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Somebody was talking about that the other
I'm
day.
not sure.
Yeah.
One thing that in your background, you helped WeWork with their culture, which was basically.
I tried.
I've been there, done that. I've tried. Yeah. That's a whole nother episode maybe. But I am wondering, did you do any work? Were you asked to do any work? Because my sense is that you would have loved to do this. Were you asked to do any work to help companies that were using the facilities of WeWork, how to best interact and engage with their remote people? Because kind of you had your internal culture, and then were you asked to transfer that on because they may have missed a real valuable add-on there to their service to help people understand how to do that well versus just give somebody some office space?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was part of the plan. I think that was the intent, because as you said so clearly, that would make complete sense. I think in order to help others, you have to help yourself first and figure out your own kind of internal house. And so when I got there, some of the values had already been created. I think my focus was I had talent acquisition and development. And so it was trying to do what I did at Adobe and Twitter and doing now with a lot of companies, which is how do you kind of take the values from just being values on a wall or cool neon lights or whatever they are to, integrating them into the processes and practices that we have. So everything from, how we're interviewing to how we're promoting people to how we're developing people, how we're recognizing people. I think those have to be anchored against the values and behaviors that you've declared.
What type of roadblocks do you find or challenge do you find as you're trying to get those values to be lived out conscious habits by each of the employees?
I think one of the things is just the idea of developing the values and behaviors is this first step. Just making sure that they're embedded and understood by the employees is so important. And I think I was talking to a client the other day, and we were talking about how similar it is to even working out or going to the gym. Like it seems awkward a little bit at first, and in kind of sharing some of the behaviors and kind of integrating them into interview questions or even feedback that I might be giving to a colleague. But over time, you kind of build that muscle, and it starts to become more natural. And you start to see the connections between the feedback that you're getting and receiving and giving to how you're being evaluated ultimately. And so I think it's really important that companies take the time to figure out how to embed the values and behaviors into all of those people, processes, and practices. Where I think companies get in trouble is if, for instance, there's, let's say you have teamwork as a value and behavior, but then the recognition program or your performance is based on how you're doing individually. So that's a gap. So I think there are a lot of, or you have all of these behavioral questions based on your values in the interview process, but then, one of the leaders says, when you ask them how the candidate was, gosh, well, I think I'd like to take them to, I can see going to lunch with them, but I'm not sure about dinner. I don't know if I'd want to go. What does that have to do with anything? Like, that had nothing to do with our values and behaviors. And so you just, you have to start training people to understand and see that we actually are expecting you to behave consistent with our values. It's almost like a playbook. That's how I think about it, a playbook for how we work together.
Is this situation where more people are remote an opportunity to really further embed those values? And if so, how?
Yes. Such a good question. In fact, I'm sure you heard that Jack Dorsey of Twitter and Square just told all of his employees that they never have to come back to the office again if they don't want to. And some other companies are also saying that. And now I see there were at least 4 different articles this last weekend in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times around culture is dead because the office is dead. And I just think that is the wrong assumption. All of a sudden we conflated culture with the office, the live office. And that's just not how I think we should define culture. Culture is more of what we're doing, what the interactions are between people. It's not, things at an office, like the ping pong tables. And I mean, that's all great. And Twitter did have like 100 different cereals available and eggs in the morning and all good stuff that helps support good culture. But it's more about the interaction. So I'm really surprised that people are saying that. I think culture is virtual. Culture goes with you. And to your point, I think it's even more important to think about intentionally how you're connecting with people and how those behaviors are being lived or not while we're working together virtually.
So this could actually be one of the greatest things to happen as far as leaders developing skills to better engage people in culture, because now they're going to be forced to. The superficial stuff of 100 different cereals. I can't even imagine 100 different cereals.
I don't know if it was 100.
is gone. And what is the company that's behind WordPress? Is that Automatic, or is that I may have the name wrong,
sure.
Forgive me, but they have like 3,200 employees and they're all virtual. They always have been virtual, and they provide a $2,000 budget for someone to set up at home. And I believe that's separate of the computer equipment. I think that's for furniture.
Wow.
And extra stuff. And so they fully take care of that's part of their culture. And then what they do is once or twice a year, either teams or the entire company get together at a resort for a big meeting where they get immersed in culture and they bond and they see each other and they do things and they get work done, but they also enjoy each other. So they reinforce the culture. So they actually have designed it to have a stronger culture than many companies do who've had these very expensive office spaces where people come in.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, I think the assumption that I'm hearing at this point is that everybody wants to work from home. And that's not necessarily true either. I have so many clients and colleagues and friends who are dying to get back to the office for any number of reasons. And I think, so I think, is there a way that we can think about our work and how we design our work in both what we're doing and how we're doing it from a cultural perspective and where we're doing it, and that might not be the same for every employee. And so instead of just, I think we tend to do this a lot in HR. We go from one extreme to another. And I compare this to when, back in the day when it was all live in-person training, and then we went to e-learning, and we thought that was just the way to go, and everybody should be online. It's all virtual training. And then we realized, oh yeah, there's actually some goodness to bringing people together. We just need to be more thoughtful about what happens in the room and the kind of learning experience we want to create those connections that you may not be able to get online or through even a virtual webinar. And so I think the same thing is happening here, to your point. How do you intentionally design an employee experience that works for them and give them options, but don't make assumptions that it's one way or another. And then how do we create that culture around it to make people happy and feel engaged, and to your point, make sure they have the basics. They have a chair that's comfortable. They're not sitting in a dining room chair that has no padding and their neck is killing them by 2 p.m.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I like what you say, that it is a blend, and being able to give people an option is really powerful. And some of it might be even a blend for individual employees, where they come to the office 3 days, and 2 days, which maybe are the worst commute days, they work from home. And now more than ever, you can start to require that when that person has a cough or doesn't sound good, stay at home. Whereas before you'd have people come to work who were sick, and you're kind of like, you should go home. No, I gotta stay. It's like, no, get out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop them at the door.
We're not saying this for you. We're saying this for us. Leave. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So we're going through this transition. It sounds like you and I agree that this is not going to be a quick spike recovery. This is going to be drawn out. So do you have a recommendation for leaders on what they should be doing in 2 areas? One, we've covered a lot with the culture and employee engagement, looking for any thoughts there. But I'm also interested in whether you have any insights to give people as far as, how do you get your business restarted? How do you get your business growing again? Because there still are needs. And as more and more people are allowed to go back to work and get going, how do we capitalize on that so we can provide a good value for our clients and new clients?
Yeah, I mean, I heard another statistic the other day that overall, even though, again, we're all working from home, I think productivity has gone down. Because people are, same with us, they're 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they're fried, they're burnt out. So I think the businesses that are pivoting quickly are the ones that are going back to strategy, being very clear about how we're pivoting and how that cascades down to every leader, function, and individual, so that everybody understands how whatever they're doing on a daily basis is helping the company move forward. So I think figuring out how we can take advantage of the changing times, and there again, even asking, I know a lot of companies who the CEO is asking for input. What do you think we should be doing? How should we be pivoting? There's a company that I worked with, Envoy, and their whole business strategy was around creating better workplaces. Well, that sucks in this time. So they, now over the last couple of months, it's been amazing to watch them pivot to, okay, we're now going to be that company that's going to help you come back to work, come back to the office safely. So here's some of the things that we're going to do to help you. So they didn't kind of move too far away from their core business in terms of creating a great workplace. And they know that creating a great workplace now is making it safe and having it be okay for people to come back. I know another business. Yeah, another business who she has a very small business, but it was an events business, and she would work with companies doing 3,000 to 5,000, sometimes double that, even conferences, live big conferences. And so, I talked to her 2 months ago, and she's like, "Oh my God, I think my business is dead." And, a month and a half ago, she said, "I figured out how to put it all online, how to do virtual conferences, how to make them engaging, how it can be more than just talking heads through Zoom." And her business is booming. She's now hiring 2 people. So I think the businesses that are, it goes back to those phases of change. You can be in denial, or you can kind of move through the phases of, okay, this isn't going away anytime soon. How do we quickly get to a point where we can now accept this and even take this on as an exciting new opportunity? And how do we bring our employees along that kind of change curve? And I think, employees can get excited and rallied around some of the pivots that I'm seeing. So being clear about what your strategy is and bringing employees along, I think and how exciting kind of the pivot could be along with their core business is something I'm seeing a lot of successful businesses do.
I think that's a great thing you're saying about bringing the employees along. It goes back to the transparency and the communication piece you're talking about. I would add, because it can be a tendency of me a little bit as a high D on the DISC behavioral index, to be careful how you word things. I mean, you want to communicate, but you want to communicate, this is an idea, we might test it, not, we love this idea, we're going in this direction, and you take 2 steps down that road and then you're like, oops, wrong decision. But if you present it properly and encourage input and allow people a safe place to comment, like that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't do any good to ask people to share their thoughts and then you whack them.
That is such a good point, though. I mean, that was a big lesson I learned at Twitter, was just, I learned so much at Adobe, but I had the luxury of, kind of having 3 to 6 months to figure out an idea and put it into a pretty PowerPoint, and then, test it out and then do all the stuff before I presented it. And then at Twitter, it was all about, getting version 1 out there and piloting it and then iterating on it and making it better, kind of co-creating all the classic design thinking approaches. And I think that's what you're talking about, be really clear about, is this just something we're testing, or is this really a shift altogether in strategy? And maybe it's both, I don't know, but, this is good time for, if you can afford it, for experimenting and piloting some things.
Yeah. And I would think, as you've indicated, a lot of employees are looking to be engaged, and you don't have to do everything they say, but they do just want to feel heard and that you considered what they had to say. This has been really great. Do you have any closing thoughts for our leaders that are, moving forward now? What would you say is the one thing that they need to do? I mean, you can say 2 or 3, but what's the big thing that's top of mind for you that you want them to definitely understand moving forward? Focus on this and it'll help you get past step 1 to step 2 and then step 3 and beyond.
I think it's what we've talked about. I think continuing to figure out those touch points with employees and, almost over communicating, both in terms of the what and how, so what we're doing from a strategic standpoint and how we're going about that culturally, sharing what we're learning along the way. And so again, kind of this balance or dance between execution and also making sure we're taking the time to talk about what we've learned along the way. I would say, the third thing is just what we talked about as well is asking questions and listening. I think coaching skills, regardless of level, is such a good set of skills to have. And so the good leaders are asking questions, really listening to people and employees, listening to their colleagues. Like, I've never seen so many companies kind of coming together and colleagues in different ways to co-create the playbook, because none of us have gone through this. And so, looking to your side and even maybe to some of your competitors to say, what are you doing, or how are you doing this? And, kind of figuring this out together. So not being afraid to say, I have, or to ask more questions than answers, I think is a good thing.
Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing you say is we can do this. We're in a mess, but we can get out of this, and it's going to take the we've got to do this together. So that's fantastic.
That's actually a good, yeah. Being inspirational, I think. Yeah. What is the North Star, and pulling people toward that, I think is good.
Yeah. Are there, we're obviously going to post your information, how to contact you, your company website, anything in particular, if somebody's just listening and doesn't get a chance to look at our online, version of this podcast, that you would want to direct them to learn more about you, see your work, get a hold of you, type of thing?
Everything about me is at melissadaimler.com that you're going to post. So where you can see me on all the different social platforms, and I try to blog as much as possible. Not as much these days, but yeah, all my articles and blogs are there. So yeah, it'd be great. I'm such a proponent of connecting, and I've met so many amazing people in the last 3 months just through LinkedIn or Twitter, just sharing ideas. I love that.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Melissa, for being with us. I really enjoyed having you on the show. And I see, you're going to continue to have a great impact on a lot of companies.
Thank you. This is a great conversation.